Hello. Welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where truth wins every time. And where does that term civilization jihad come from? Where does it come from? It comes from the explanatory memorandum, something we owe to one police officer doing his job. Maryland transit officer back in 2004 caught someone taking pictures of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge support structure. And because of that, we now have access to a document called the Explanatory Memorandum. It was a document hidden in a dugout, hidden sub-basement of a member of the Muslim Brotherhood of North America. And this document was used in a federal trial against the Holy Land Foundation. I'm just going to read one paragraph from that document. It says this. The subject header is this: Understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. But there is no escape from that destiny except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? Again, this is not something I created. It is something created by the Muslim Brotherhood to describe their war here. I have some outstanding people joining us today, and I am super excited. One of them is Ann Ubelis, former New York City police officer, and I have her joining us because we're going to talk about the Muslim Community Patrol. And Ann, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Paulie.
And Ann is the host of Southern Sense, so we'll have her join us in just a minute. And then I want to thank you for your service, for protecting us for all those years. I'm not in New York City, but I am in New York State, and I have visited, so thank you. And I'm going to bring in Benjamin Baird. Now, let me just give you a little bit of intro on who Benjamin Baird is. He's a fellow who writes for Islamist Watch. Now, that's a research fellow, so he does an excellent job. Islamist Watch is part of the Middle East Forum. He investigates and exposes lawful Islamist organizations and extremists throughout North America. His research and commentary have appeared in dozens of nationally prominent publications, including the Daily Caller, Jewish News Syndicate, New English Review. He's a regular contributor at the Investigative Project on Terrorism. Mr. Baird holds a bachelor's in Middle Eastern Studies from the American Military University and is a member of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. He's a decorated U.S. Army veteran, infantry veteran, with over 3 years of combat experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. And without further ado, let me bring him in. Hello, Benjamin. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Oh, I read your article, and I have to say, Ann and I had been discussing the Muslim Community Patrol about a couple months ago when that article first came out. I think it was by the New York Post, and we were mind blown. And Ann has a lot of information and knowledge about what shouldn't be happening. So I'm just going to start out with the questions, and we can knock through this. So I want to say that, again, the link to his article is above in the show description. So if you want to go and read that, excellent. We're going to knock out the article as best as we can by asking questions. So I'm going to start with Benjamin. One of the things I had to ask as I read your article was what got you started on this topic of the Muslim Community Patrol? Was it the funeral in Brooklyn that you mentioned at the beginning of your article?
Well, the short answer to that is no, but I do want to return to that because I do think that's important. What got me interested in it was very much the same things that I think maybe drew you to the article in the very beginning. I read the New York Post article, and there was probably a half dozen other publications picked it up afterwards. And despite not having much information on the group, it really provoked quite a backlash on social media from, a lot of people were fearful that this group would attempt to spread Sharia law, that they might closely resemble some Muslim patrols that you see in Europe and even here stateside in Minnesota. But however, there just wasn't much information about the origins of the group, their leadership, their ideology. There wasn't much out there at all. And, after a simple Facebook review, looking at their social media accounts of some of the top leaders of the Muslim Community Patrol, or MCP for short, I just found it was really eye-opening, in addition to looking at their website and some other recent information sources that have just come up recently.
Well, thank you.
If I may, to go back to the Muslim funeral procession that you're referring to, that was an event on December 3rd where a FedEx truck driver or a pair of truck drivers accidentally backed into a couple mourners somewhere in Brooklyn outside of a Muslim funeral. Now the crowd got quickly turned into an angry mob and surrounded the vehicle, and the driver and his partner, in an effort to defend themselves, they used box cutters, whatever was available to them, to fight off this mob. But I think if the Muslim Community Patrol were around in a situation like that, I'm afraid of what the outcome would be. I don't trust necessarily that it would be good for those two couriers on that day.
That's probably very, very true. Ann, I have a question for you. Benjamin's article states, unfortunately, residents of Brooklyn's Bay Ridge and Sunset Park neighborhoods may have to get used to such scenes after the New York Post reported a new security group cruising local streets in a white Ford Taurus painted with stripes and insignia nearly identical to the local police. Now, again, Ann's a former NYPD police officer, and I value her insight and direction, so I know that you saw the pictures of the Muslim Community Patrol, and I'd love to hear what you think of that.
Oh, man, how would I go and how many levels I found things so wrong there? First off, these community patrols have to go through training by authorized NYPD personnel. What really struck me odd is you had two off-duty personnel, not authorized by NYPD, to perform this training. Number two, the similarity in the uniforms and the vehicles to NYPD equipment was extremely stunning, because that's in direct violation of the penal code, which happens to be specifically 190.25, in which it states that pretends to be a police officer or federal law enforcement officer as enumerated in Section 2-15 of the CPL Criminal Procedure Law, or wears or displays without authority any uniform, badge, or other insignia or facsimile thereof, by which such police officer or federal law enforcement officer is lawfully distinguished. And the fact that they made a facsimile of anything as close to it as to fool the public should be in direct violation of 190.26. I worked with the Shomran, which is a Hasidic patrol in Brooklyn. They did not use uniforms with insignias on it. They did not have vehicles with insignias on it. They just used their own private vehicles in most cases. The same with the Asian patrol. Curtis Lewa was the first one to actually use a uniform, but in no way did it imitate NYPD or any other law enforcement agency. So I find it so stunning. And these civilian patrols are not authorized to go with weapons. That's something else that I noticed in your article. Our auxiliary police force in NYPD do not carry weapons, and they wear our uniform. So there's so many things on this that is just so wrong.
Thank you, Ann. I think I got one more for you. See if we covered it. Benjamin R's article also says that the Muslim Community Patrol Services, MCPS, isn't a new concept, nor is it some benign neighborhood watch merely established as it claims to protect members of the local community from escalating quality of life nuisance crimes. Is it true that it's not? I mean, it's not a new concept.
Community watch groups, no. Auxiliary officers, no. But to the extent in which they've done this, and they've done this once before, and I actually worked a war on drugs march from this specific community group that was there in the mid and late 80s. 1987 was the march that I had worked, and they did not imitate the vehicles. But then again, they got themselves in trouble later on, which caused them to be disbanded. But this is not a new concept, no. But to the extent that they've taken it, that's a new one in my ballpark.
Well, thank you. Benjamin, this one's for you. You quote MCP, the Muslim Community Patrol's own vice president, Noor Rabba, from his interview with, I think it's called Blickner, or I can't pronounce that.
I think it's Brookliner, maybe.
Brookliner? Okay.
It's an imitation of Brooklyn.
Yeah. This is it said this. This is basically a neighborhood community patrol on steroids, and people are intimidated. That's a pretty bold statement to make from the public, from a quote new organization. Is there a hidden history behind this organization?
Yes, in fact there is, and I was taken aback as much as you to hear MCP's own vice president say that, as if he was bragging about what his organization stood for. But again, they reflect many of the same values and qualities that we saw, as Ann referred to, from a sort of they weren't quite as organized, but there was a neighborhood watch to fight the crack epidemic in the late 1980s. However, this group was led by a radical imam by the name of Siraj Wahhaj, who actually led a small force of devout Muslims to help fight the crack epidemic. That was their mission at the time.
Wait, this is the Siraj Wahhaj, the guy that has the compound that was connected to the compound in New Mexico. It was his son that had the compound in New Mexico, right? We're talking about the guy whose son trained people to be school shooters. Are we talking about the same guy?
Yes, it's the very same guy. And the father, the gentleman who I'm speaking about, was actually a co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He espouses very hardcore Islamist beliefs. He believes in death to apostates, death to homosexuals. He is definitely a bad egg when it comes to some of these radical imams in New York. But, that group in the 1980s, again, as Ann alluded to, it didn't end well for them. It ended up where Imam Siraj Wahhaj and two other of his guards ended up going, I believe they were arrested for weapons possession because they'd taken weapons from some of the crack dealers that they'd encountered earlier in the day, and they were stopped by police with them. So I believe that may have been what caused them to break up. However, as a result of their work, they were awarded a rather lucrative contract to work as private security enforcers for a group called SSI. And this went on throughout the 1990s. Wahhaj was actually employed to recruit local Muslims from mosques, many of them fresh out of prison who converted while they were in jail. And half of the guards were said to carry firearms legally by permit, and the other half were said to carry their firearms illegally and as concealed weapons. Now, of course, again, things didn't end well for Wahhaj's group. By 1991, there had been let's see, one of the guards was charged with second-degree murder and later acquitted. A second guard crippled a man who refused to press charges in jail. And a third man was severely beaten, and it resulted in a lawsuit that was settled out of court. At the same time, one SSI employee, one of these Muslim guards, was killed, and 3 others were wounded in the line of duty. I have a statement from one of them, and this comes courtesy of a 1991 New York Times article where he said, "If they spill one drop of our blood, we spill gallons of theirs." And Wahaj at the time, they quoted him for saying, "We are willing to fight, willing to die, and willing to kill in self-defense."
I sadly remember the statement with the blood. Wow, yeah, I remember that being out there. Annie, feel free to jump in. I'm just
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Because if I remember correctly, around the time of the World Trade Center bombing the first time in February of '93, there were clashes between the Hasidic community and Muslims throughout, New York City. A lot of them were happening around the Brooklyn Bridge and other areas. And so my question to Benjamin would be, can we tie Wahaj into these uprisings back in '93? You're going to remember we had Ilhan Omar just say, someone did something, which brought around the rise of, what was it, CARE she was talking about? CARE formed immediately after the '93 bombings in order to protect the image of the Muslim community. And that is a day I will never forget because I was on duty that day. And that was, my sister-in-law was in the towers at the time when this occurred, and people did die on that day. There has been a clash with the Muslim community in New York City, but it's been quiet because of all the taqiyya and all the guilt and everything else going on. It's not something that is being publicly spoken about. And, Paul, you bringing this forward is very important. And I'm just going to add one other thing is that sometimes I would take a different route into work that took me down Cypress Avenue past one of the major mosques. And back in the 80s, they had armed guards standing outside the mosques, openly armed Muslim guards. So these neighborhood patrols are not new to the Muslim community, but it's new to us to the extent in which they are armed, in which they do take their, quote, responsibilities. And I find it ironic that, we're amazed that they're also out there openly converting people to Islam. Why should we be amazed? They've been doing this all along since the 1950s.
And that's exactly right. It goes back as far. I try to keep it to the 60s, but I'm not aware of all the stuff in the 50s. I've only been able to trace back to the 60s yet, so I'm still catching up in some ways. Wow.
Well, you got to remember the first mosque built here was. I'm sorry, Paul. I was just saying the first mosque built in the United States was in Wisconsin in the 1950s, and it was a test to see how they'd be accepted in the neighborhood.
I'm going to come back to you in just a second because you mentioned a very important thing, and it's kind of related to where I'm going to go. I got one more for Benjamin before I get back to you. Here's one for you, Benjamin. You wrote, wow, the relative safety hasn't. He says, but relative safety hasn't kept NCPS members, again, that's the Muslim Community Patrol and Service members, from attempting to emulate their predecessors. And now, a now deleted flyer advertising an October 12th, 2016 MCOPS meeting notes that the group discussed applying for handguns and shotguns. Would you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so now people have to understand they refer to this group as new, and of course we've already pointed out that there were predecessors to them, but the Muslim Community Patrol isn't even new in itself. They were actually founded in 2016, and they went by a different name in the past. They were the Muslim Cops, Muslim Civilian Observation Patrol and Services. MCOPS or Muslim Cops is the name they went by. Now, when I first started investigating their Facebook page, they still had some of their information up from this time when they were referred to as Muslim cops. And a very early training session had the Vice President, Noor Rabah, speaking to some early recruits. This is before they were doing any patrols. And he put a flyer up that said, applying for handguns and shotguns, which they discussed. At one point, he even made light of the fact that people weren't going to take them seriously if they didn't have guns. He said a joke about, what are we going to do, whistle for people to stop? So they, in the very beginning, they didn't think that they actually believed they were going to be patrolling the streets with weapons, which to me is frightening. And, today when he's been questioned in numerous interviews, he holds up the fact that, we're unarmed, we're not going to arrest any people. But that wasn't exactly their original intent, was it?
So, Annie, I got to ask you this. I'm one of those guys who volunteered. I went to the neighborhood watch, and I went through the training. And they told us we couldn't carry, even if we had concealed carry permits. Yeah, you just told us some people were, and this is New York City we're talking about, they have some of the toughest gun laws in the country. Is it legal to open or to carry as a community patrol at all?
Unless New York City became a little less liberal than when I was there, which I doubt, because we had a Republican mayor at the time. No. As a matter of fact, New York City is the most restrictive of cities in attempting to get any sort of a permit. Whether you could be a jewelry merchant, and you'd have to jump through 15 different hoops before they even said, "Well, we'll look at your application." It is the most restrictive. Up until recently, they had in place laws that officers couldn't even carry more than 7 rounds in their firearms.
Oh, that's right. Yes, we're fighting that in New York State.
So
yes.
Why would they want an armed civilian acting as a vigilante? No, New York City has not changed its stripes.
Some things are just mind-numbing. Holy cow! Wow, thank you. And it's I think they're flouting the law as far as they can go, and then trying to deny they just did it. Oh my gosh, Benjamin, you took this farther. You looked into Kashif Hussain, an MCPS leader, and now this is the part that kills me. And Annie, I would probably comment on this one. He's also an NYPD auxiliary sergeant, and his relationship with Muslims Giving Back, MGB. Could you tell our listeners what you discovered?
Right. So Muslims Giving Back is a charity organization based out of the Muslim Community Center in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Now, that's the same mosque where the Muslim Community Patrol is based out of. It's also their center of operations. So you have to understand that many of the leadership of Muslims Giving Back are also involved with the Muslim Community Patrol, including Kashif Hussain, who is a co-founder of Muslims Giving Back, and Noor Rabah, who you'll hear me mention over and over again because he's sort of the de facto spokesperson for the MCP. He runs a charity burial service, an Islamic burial service, which actually accounts for a third of the charity work or a third of the mission of Muslims Giving Back. So these, like many Muslim organizations, they're incestual, where you'll have leadership having overlapping roles in several organizations. So why is Muslim Giving Back important? They were the subject of a years-long NYPD undercover investigation starting in 2012, where the police department actually found that Assad Ace Dandia, who was a Muslim Giving Back co-founder, just like Kashif Hussain from MCP, he organized a trip to Pakistan in 2011 to join an extremist group which sympathized with Al-Qaeda. He spoke very highly of the late Al-Qaeda commander Anwar al-Awlaki, and he promoted violence against Shiite Muslims. Dandia, that 2011 trip which I just referred to, he planned it with close associate and friend Justin Kalibi, who was arrested, by the way, in February 2013 for attempting to join Al-Qaeda factions in Yemen. So this is the connection, I believe, between MCP and, potential terrorist organizations out there.
And Anwar al-Awlaki, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we have a Democrat president aim a missile at this guy? Isn't he the first American citizen killed by a sitting Democrat president? Isn't that true? Holy cow.
And didn't he come out of the same mosque as the blind sheik that masterminded the World Trade Center bombing back in '93?
Yeah, and nobody's saying, should we close this place? Holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, I will mention one thing. The New York City Police Department lost a lawsuit against the Muslim community and had to take out of their patrol guide a section identifying terrorists. They were sued, and they were forced to remove this from their training because they got to the heart of the matter, and they were exposed for who they truly are. And for that, the people of New York are going to pay a heavy penalty one day soon.
I didn't realize they took a section of the training manual out. That's interesting. I'm going to have to end up talking with you offline more about that because that is, wow, that's pretty powerful. The first annual banquet and fundraiser on February 26th. I don't think anyone's going to believe this one.
Right. So, just a couple months after they supposedly were founded, the Muslim Community Patrol held a fundraiser. They did this to offset the cost, of course, of their new uniforms and their shiny Ford Tauruses. And they had a couple of speakers show up to these events. One of them was another Muslims Giving Back co-founder by the name of Gareth Bryant. Now, when I looked into this gentleman, I went to his blog to see what his beliefs were, and the very first post I came across, a January blog post, Bryant was supporting the R&B singer R. Kelly, who's been in the news, of course, lately, because he's been accused of having sexual relations with over a dozen women aged 13 to 16. Now, while Brian, sort of condemned these acts, he did want to make a disclaimer. He said, and I quote, "I say this definitively because he was basically saying that R. Kelly wasn't a child molester, and his justification for that was, quote, "I say this definitively because none of the women confirmed to have had sexual encounters with R. Kelly were non- or prepubescent, therefore confirming that they weren't Islamically children."
Okay. Will this group ever report what is acceptable under Sharia but not acceptable under the United States Constitution, the New York State Penal Code, or New York City law? Doesn't this type of statement make the whole organization suspect? I hope the police officers in New York City are listening. I sent several invites to listen to this show. Oh my gosh, this is scary stuff. Oh my, well, Ann, what do you think about that? Oh my gosh.
Oh man, what I would see coming up from these people is they would publicly shame someone in the street. And if that person turns around and starts to argue or fight back, the first thing they're probably going to do is call in a cop and say, hey, they're harassing our Muslim community, and have that person arrested for, public disorderly conduct. So I see them trying to use it against an individual they disagree with. That's how I see it.
Wow.
Sure.
play the victim so you can get away. That's what they've been doing for decades, and we've so many people still have yet wisen up. Wow, insane. Palestinian clothing designer Jay Manzini was also invited to speak at that gala. What was significant about that?
This, I guess I'll just call him a subject of my investigation. He got under my skin, very much so, because he's sort of a social media star, and he's a clothing designer who will promote Instagram posts where he'll say, the first 5 people to like me, I'll send them checks for $100,000. Or he'll say, if you share these posts, I'm going to give away 8 cars tomorrow. Now, anytime he does a minor act of charity, for instance, there's a picture of him hand feeding a handicapped gentleman a pizza, he's sure to plaster his social media with these pictures. However, there's never any evidence to show that he's giving away these large sums of money. Now, that's the first thing that struck me about him. But after examining his Instagram page, I found a few disturbing statements from him. One of them was where he was echoing, of course, a notorious anti-Semitic conspiracy theory by saying that the reason for 9/11 was to give the Jewish Rothschilds family, quote, a reason to enter Iraq and seize their central bank. He also added that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban were formed after the government left their weapons in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries and trained citizens to kill each other.
Oh my God. It's just mind-numbing. To think that this is the stuff that makes you say, why isn't the NYPD, I mean, they've got to have an investigation. I hope in God they have an investigation going, because the stuff that's in your article, to me, I mean, tell me, is anything you've researched not considered open source intelligence in this? Because this sounds like it's all open source. So,
yes, sir,
NYPD, do your job, get rid of this group. Holy cow. An open source intelligence, for those who don't know, it means you can basically find it all online, people. It's there. It's not necessarily all on the web, but if you do your research, it's there. It's free information. It doesn't cost. You don't have to have a top secret clearance to get this stuff. You just have to be good at what you do, like Benjamin is. It's just mind-numbing. We've got one more for you. You state the MCPS promotes a hardline version of Islam, and you also hint that MCOPS is anti-Semitic. And you've kind of said it, but I want you to restate it, I guess.
Sure. I mean, I guess I could emphasize some of the things I've already said about their origins, about their heroes that they invite to their charities and banquet, their fundraisers. But there's some other signs that I saw that they're promoting an Islamist agenda. One of these was from Noor Rabah, again, the vice president of MCP, who, looking at his Facebook page, he published a June 19th post where he called on others, and he wrote a letter himself to the New York State Liquor Authority asking its chairman to deny a local business its liquor license, and encouraging others to use his letter as a template to shut down this, quote, satanic club, which, of course, is a satanic club. And another post, this one in January 2018, Rabah published an Islamic parable from the Hadith, implying that a 2.5 magnitude earthquake, which hit Medina, Saudi Arabia, some months ago, was actually punishment for the residents there for, they drank too much booze and they were fornicating and listening to music, and that was God's punishment to them. Now, when it comes to anti-Semitism, there's a couple facts worth mentioning. Following the Jewish Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, Noor Rabah, didn't, like many Muslims, didn't stand up and say, we stand with these people, we didn't fundraise for them. In fact, he posted a Facebook message saying, while everyone is mourning the terrorist attack that happened today in Pennsylvania, I continue to mourn the terrorist attacks that happen every day on Muslims in Palestine and the entire Muslim world. Now, the fact that he didn't have any sympathy for, I believe, 11 killed in that event, was unsurprising given his ties and his membership, in fact, to the Muslims Giving Back. Again, that's the Islamic charity that's based out of the same mosques as the Muslim Community Patrol. By looking at Muslims Giving Back, I saw that they did a fundraiser where they sold wristbands. You know, we have the Live Strong wristbands that were popularized by Lance Armstrong years ago. These wristbands said, "Martyrs never die, and Gaza strong." And all proceeds from the sale of these wristbands went to the Islamic Relief Gaza, which is a branch of a global charity that's under investigation by the United Kingdom and the United States, and it's banned in Israel and the United Arab Emirates because of its suspected ties to terrorism. If you look at members of the Gaza branch, which is in particular one of the most troublesome branches of this organization, you'll find that, you know, the upper echelon of this group can be tied directly to Hamas militants fighting in Palestine and Jordan and elsewhere, and very much involved in violence against Israeli Jews.
And I do want to mention, for those who don't know, the Middle East Forum, the organization that Benjamin works with, is responsible for exposing a huge amount of the relationships and terrorist links of Islamic Relief. So again, whether it's in Canada or here, that group has incredible ties to terrorism, and we owe a debt of thanks to the Middle East Forum for doing that research. And Benjamin, we're getting near the end. Holy cow! This is. Ann, do you have any questions you'd like to ask before I?
No, not really. But you know, we've been watching the spread of radical Islam throughout our society for decades, and like I said, starting back in the 1950s with the first mosque being opened up. You have the Golan schools that have been opening throughout the New York City school districts, and they're openly embracing these schools, and not only just in New York City, but across the nation. And unless we wake up and smell the coffee, we're going to fall into the same thing Europe did in the 11th and 12th centuries.
That's right.
If we don't stop this now and inform people. So, yes, there are there are moderate Muslims out there, people that have a good idea, like Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, but I don't ever see Islam being amended or altered. If you do, then you become an apostate. Unless they start a whole brand new religion, I don't see an end to this. And it's going to be a rather civil war.
That's what Europe is scared of right now, and we're going to talk about that during the news portion. But, yeah, this is that's the purpose of my show, to wake people up, to get the truth out that your regular TV shows and radio shows are just too scared to deal with. Facts are important. Sure. And if it means getting to the people who do the research to get them out, that's what I want to do. I'd love to be the guy doing all the exposing, but you can't do everything. And I'm talking to Benjamin about another group on the side, that I want to look at. So, you know, there's so much going on out there. It's hard. It's just so much. That's the thing, people. We need to understand. It's mind-numbing how much is happening now, and I know I'm not going to get through the news today. There's that much happened this week that it's just mind-numbing. Benjamin, I want to say thank you for joining us. Can you tell them where they can follow you and where they can learn more. And tell them about the work that Islamist Watch does for the Middle East Forum.
Absolutely, sure. But let me first thank you for giving me a platform to discuss this issue, and for the work that you do, which is very instrumental in getting the word out there and spreading the word about radical Islam, I think. But you can find me on, of course, by subscribing to Islamist Watch or the Middle East Forum. I actually do writing for Campus Watch as well, which is another project of the Middle East Forum. I would also recommend people subscribe to the Investigative Project, which is founded and run by a very intelligent man who's been involved monitoring terrorism and radical Islam for years, Steve Emerson. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Benji Baird. At Benji Baird. That's BenjiBaird. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. We'll have to have you back soon. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
And
Thank you.
Tell them about your radio show. I don't want to exclude you.
All right, and I just want to let Benjamin know, I told Paul to give you my contact information so that I can have you then on my show. There is so much more
I'd
to
love
talk
that.
about.
Of course.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. People can find me on Fridays from 3 to 6 here on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, Facebook, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube. Oh, God, half a dozen other areas. They can simply go to the name of my show, Southern Sense, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. And, Paulie, it's always fun talking to you. And I'll text you later on.
Okay.
All right.
God bless. Tell everybody down there I said hello. See you soon, guys. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Come back, Ann. I didn't.
I was saying we got some shrimp and grits waiting for you once you come back on down.
Okay. That was a new introduction for me, and I still talk about that. Thank you. All right.